Well, welcome back. I hope you are well. Today, I want to talk about a question that most young people, particularly young men, are faced with and ponder on, and therefore um, have found difficulties in knowing the best answers to this question. The question is a simple one. It's whether you should actually go to university or college or avoid it. Over the past 2 decades, we have seen changes like we've never seen before, especially around technology. And 2 decades ago, we had just started to enjoy the internet on a global scale. When it came out initially, it was something that was used primarily by the classes, and today it's used by the masses. Since the last 2 decades, we've seen great changes. Technology has moved at a very fast pace. New innovations, the digital opportunities available, social media, and we've seen great developments across the entire working landscape. Now, some of the stories that come from the past 2 decades give us a perspective that has caused most young men to question whether they should go to university or not. We have founders of great companies like Mark Zuckerberg. Pre-Mark's rise to fame, we had people like Bill Gates and others. We've seen people who would drop out, create great businesses, become very wealthy, become billionaires, and therefore most young men are asking a simple question. Well, if the world and some of the biggest companies that we see today were founded and owned by dropouts and people who did not score high in the academic profession, then what is the point? As a matter of fact, A students usually work for C and D students. Now, this has caused young men to question whether there is any value in going to university, going to college. Now, we compound this confusion by the fact that we also have wealthy people, some people who perhaps have made a lot of money, but never went to university, never went to college, never even went to high school. And we hear of much of them in our local areas of influence. Some of them have an audience, a following, and they keep saying, you shouldn't bother going to university. Don't forget about college. Just go straight into business and make your money. And so most young men are asking the question, is this the best strategy for me? Now, if you are asking yourself that question, I think you've done a great service to yourself. I believe in asking questions, and I believe in asking questions relentlessly. I'm going to try and share my perspective on the whole debate. I should state, it doesn't mean my perspective is the right one, but is one for consideration. Don't dismiss it completely. Hear me out. I'm going to combine what I consider to be the qualitative and the quantitative aspects of how you can make this decision. Stories and numbers. Good decisions lie in what I call the bridge between narratives or stories and numbers. You have to combine both. Now, I talk about several topics, and I'm going to draw from the conversation of intersexual dynamics. When I talk to women, I explain that there are 4 things you need to just get you started if you find that you are struggling in finding a mate. Firstly, you have to understand what your value proposition is, because there has to be a value exchange with the other party. Number 2, proximity. Obscurity is partly why most people fail in life. People don't know you, and when they see you, you're not memorable. So, firstly, get in proximity. Thirdly, get attention so that you can shake out all the obscurity around you. Number 4, compete. Because when you get in proximity of what you want, or the people you want, or the goals you want, it's never going to be given to you for free. You're going to have to compete. And once you've competed, and if you succeed, if you win, the most important and the most necessary task is retention. You have to retain whatever you've acquired, whatever goal you've achieved. Otherwise you lose it. Now think about those 4 or 5 different areas and consider those 4 or 5 different areas from the perspective of the choices you're trying to make with regards to university. Value proposition, the importance of proximity, the importance of avoiding obscurity and getting attention, competing, and retention. Now let's get started in the question about, should you go to university? And many years ago, a book was written. It was titled Acres of Diamonds. I won't go into detail, but the key part of that book, the theme of the book was, whatever you're looking for is around you, and therefore you should not journey to another land in pursuit of what is next to you. That if you could open your eyes, if you can look around, you will find that your acres of diamonds is right by your feet. Stories were written, they were published as part of that book, about people who sold their farm, traveled around the world looking for gold, looking for diamonds, looking for oil, only to come back home to find out that the land they sold contained the acres of diamonds, contained all the wealth they needed. And that is one perspective. On a separate perspective are people who say, listen, I've looked around the land and there are no acres of diamonds here. There are no gold, there is no gold, there is no silver, and there is no oil. But through education, I might get the opportunity to find oil, silver, gold, or I might even get the opportunity to find my diamonds. Depending on where you live, one of the 2 stories will resonate with you. If you're born in the West, and if you live in the West, and if you were raised in the West, you have an advantage. You have an advantage by your inheritance. And therefore, your decision might vary, and your decision might be different to someone who was born in a continent for which they do not have the same opportunities and access that you have. Someone born in a poor country, from a poor tribe in Africa, may be of the view that perhaps education will be the pathway to changing their lives. So one of the first things to understand is put yourself in one of those 2 camps and categories. I hope you can see that what this means is that there isn't a formula that fits everyone. We are all different. Different histories, different stories, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different aspirations and goals and dreams, and therefore different choices we have to make. The choices we make, however, will come with costs. And I will talk about costs shortly. They'll come with constraints. They will come with consequences. And finally, there will be trade-offs. There are no solutions. In a finite world, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. So the question about should I go to university is a question about what trade-off am I willing to accept. There is no solution. And what this simply means is that we start with that overarching perspective and we come down to the individual level and we ask a simple question. Are you male? Are you female? Are you a man? Or are you a woman? I'm going to pretend here, in this particular instance, that you are in the United Kingdom. To make it simple, Women who were born to poor countries or countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in other parts of the world, in the Oriental, where opportunities are not there for them, it would be silly to say that women should not go to universities or colleges for further education. Now, there are two ways and two pathways for success. Primarily, reading and writing leads to academic success. With words, we can interpret and we can express ourselves. One of the ways we learn is through reading and writing. Now, you can see I'm not limiting my conversation to just higher education. I'm talking about education. Therefore, if you're born into a place and if you are of a gender where you're restricted from actually generating the opportunity for equality, for choice, for freedom, it would be preposterous for anybody to suggest that it's a waste of time. Because for you, and in your case, it may not be a waste of time. It might be the saving grace. On the other hand, if you're from the West, where there is choice and women are not restricted based on their gender, then there is a different choice to make. Now, I go back to the statement about, are you male or are you female? Are you a man or are you a woman? I state this not to be sexist, no. Not because I think both sexes do not have inherent value and should have access to the same opportunities, no. I say this because there is an aspect that we should consider. Women have to get the major parts of their lives as early as possible and much sooner before men. Nature gives men a double standard that benefits men and takes from women, sadly, in a way that doesn't benefit women. So, for example, the choice of should I study changes from should I study to should I study now. If you want a family, there are decisions you have to make, and it could be a case of you bringing forward education so that you can start your family later, or you might decide, I'm going to have my family now, and then I'll go into education so I do not have a gap, and therefore I do not lose all that training, taking into account the changes in technology. They're very simple when you're thinking about your decisions. You begin with the end in mind, and you work backwards. Generally speaking, men have a higher burden of performance in society. We built this world. Now, I know some people might be gritting their teeth just to hear me say that. Now, hear me out. Don't get in your fifis. Don't get excited. Don't start getting red and blushing. This is a man's world. Why? Because we built this world. Now, I'm not looking to whether we deserve to keep it. I am simply saying the infrastructure upon which supports the entire system that we call civilization was built by men. We maintain it, and therefore, in order for us to transfer from our generation to the next generation, we need other men, some of which have to sacrifice their time, sweat and blood to acquire the knowledge that the current people who maintain the system have in order for us to have a smooth transition. And what this simply means is we're now going into subject matters and subject areas. Science, technology, engineering, and math, and a few others, medicine, accountancy, are mandatory. Without that, our society crumbles. Now, there are first principles that undergird science. Some of those principles have to be taught formally. Now, I know that technology sometimes drives science, and sometimes science drives technology. Usually, it is the former. Science is a product of technology. We stumble on things based on what we've created, and we theorize and find a way to explain. In any case, the infrastructure we have, part of that infrastructure requires good, willing participants to ensure that we transfer that knowledge to them. So we put the burden on men, primarily because some of the jobs are very high risk. They require long hours. They require you being away from your family. In some cases, the mortality rate is far in excess of the general population. Men are generally used to suffering and sacrificing themselves. So, for the select few subject areas, education is not even a question, it's a necessity. It's then a choice you make as to whether you want to be one of those few who the mantle is, or the keys are handed over to. So, question, are you male or are you female? Now let me move over to females and I'll talk about this briefly. Now understand this is a session that is not too detailed. I don't have the time. Forgive me therefore if I say things perhaps you don't agree with. Since the 1970s, we've seen an uptake in female participation in the West and in the world. Today, women are the most enrolled and therefore the most, all things remaining equal, graduated. Women are also the most in debt. In most cases, 80% to 85%, the courses that are chosen are courses that are not necessary or required to maintain the infrastructure. They're usually courses and subject matters that are elective. Humanities and it's all of its derivatives. Necessary to have a rounded individual, but not needed to maintain the infrastructure. The uptake in science, engineering, technology, math is still very, very low. So one could make the argument that if you are a woman, if you are not going into the STEM field and the adjunct to the STEM field, it might be useful for you to reconsider, because most of the degrees you come up out of university with are generally useless degrees. Plus you come out with debt, so you invest your time, you borrow money that cannot be forgiven, for which you cannot claim bankruptcy on. You take your time, you invest your youth. Remember, you have to get the early decisions as soon as possible, so therefore you actually sacrifice it. Not only your time and money, but your biological assets, beauty, attractiveness, and your reproductive value. I call it your RFV, reproductive fertility value. For a degree that is generally useless, but here's the key thing, a degree that does not guarantee you a career. It might lead you to having a job, and most people have jobs. Most people do not have careers, and even fewer people have callings. A touchy subject. But the key thing is to understand, are you male or are you female, and recognize the burden of performance, and therefore choose whether you wish to go into science or its derivatives, or whether the arts and the humanities really has any value, all things considered. That said, let me start with perhaps something I think might be useful. The question is, what's the purpose? What is the benefit of the education system? Primarily higher education. We assume you have the basics, reading and writing. I'm talking about higher education. Now, I think there are some benefits. Number one, structure. I'm going to focus on men primarily, although this applies to women as well. I'll focus on men because over the past 40 years, we've been creating a generation of men who are not made and not cut from the same cloth as their forefathers. Not very focused, generally lazy, lacking ambition, lacking self-direction, lacking a sense of self-worth. I won't go into the causes or the reasons, but therefore I will speak to men. Again, it applies to women. Universities or higher education gives you the opportunity for structure. You walk into a place where there's a structure. There's a dorm room. The classes are held on certain locations, in certain venues, at certain times. There is a syllabus. You have to follow the syllabus. There are tests, there are assignments, there are examinations. You have to follow. So we provide structure. Now, most men in the UK and in the West, a third of men born since, should I say, Generation X, say the 1965 period. Now, the baby boom was from 1965, rather 19. Let me go back. We've gone through several generations. The Great Generation, the Silent, the baby boom, Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z. 1900 to 1925 to 1927, we call that the Great Generation. 25, 27 up until 40, 45, we call that the Silent Generation. 40, 45 up until 65, we call that baby boomers. So we go from 45 to 65-ish, baby boomers. 65 to 1980, 81, 82, we call those Generation X. The rest, Generation Y, Generation Z. Young men who have been born to parents who are either Generation X, the end of Generation X, and the millennials, have been born to single-parent families. So there are no men in the families. They're predominantly raised by their mothers. And therefore, in the absence of the men, they lack structure and they lack a sense of direction, a sense of identity. And this is where the higher education system plays a part. Because from a low education state point of view, some of these men never get to see men like them in junior college, or let me use the word, in the junior days. Preschool and school days, they're mainly female teachers. And for the first time, some men only see male teachers of competence in university. So the first benefit of the university system or higher education is structure. Number two, discipline. Well, you have to be disciplined, otherwise you remain a child and remain a student forever. You need discipline. The reason you need discipline is birthed from a vision, a goal, a dream you have. If the vision you have is to graduate, then you will find the discipline to study so that you can graduate. Number three, networking. The opportunity that you can come from any part of the world and you can meet people. Now, I started today's session talking about your acres of diamonds, and I talked about whether you believe it's somewhere out there or it's somewhere around you. The one thing I didn't discuss, which I should have, is immigration and immigrants. The young, ambitious, but poor little boy, no fault of his own, but based on geographical lottery, who was born in Bangladesh and would never have the opportunity, could apply to a university in the United States. And he could get, in this particular instance, the opportunity to study. It will cost him, no problem. But what that affords him is the opportunity to be in proximity. Value proposition, proximity, obscurity, competition, retention. So in his case, traveling and leaving his home for an education that might grant him access to a different life. The value of that education may not be what he graduates with, but proximity, removing obscurity from his life, and the ability to compete. By traveling abroad, getting the opportunity to study, graduating successfully, he might be given the opportunity for a green card. He might get an opportunity for him to actually get a job rather than returning back to Bangladesh. Suddenly, he's opened the gates for his loved ones and for his family. So in thinking about the whole cost, there are intrinsic and non-intrinsic costs that we must consider. Some are connected to the stories, some are connected to the numbers. Now let me come back. Networking, therefore, could be a useful way of meeting people. Now speak to anyone who's actually done an MBA. They will tell you the cost of the MBA was not what was paid. It consists of some other items. But the value of the MBA was not the certificate per se. It's the alumni you graduate from. It's the networking, it's the people you meet. So networking is a benefit. Now, number 4, perhaps the most important, especially for women and men who want to be married in the future, is you get the opportunity to meet your spouse. Think about this. You walk into a campus and all you have, assuming you're 18, you have people from 18 all the way up to 30, graduates or the graduate group and the postgraduate group. Right. Apologies. The undergraduate group, the graduate group, and beyond graduate, postgraduate group, people doing their doctorates. And what you find is people who are 18 years all the way to 30, 40, sometimes 50. You have, for women, it means you have access to educated men. There is a concept called hypergamy. There is another concept called hypergamy. And there is one concept called isogamy. Hypergamy simply means women generally want men who are at a socioeconomic level and intelligence greater than they are. Hypergamy means men generally will go for women who at a socioeconomic level below who they are, where they are. Isogamy simply means people mate across social hierarchies. If you combine the three, what you find is women will mate upwards and horizontally. Hyper and iso. Men will mate horizontally and downwards. Iso, hypo. What this simply means is that if you are a woman and you want to be married, the university campus and being part of various alumni is a great way for you to meet men at your level or higher. So you have choice. Because when you leave that environment, an environment where you might have thousands and thousands of men, when you leave that environment, the pool shrinks. Now, it doesn't shrink in numbers, but it shrinks in terms of the value proposition. The campus is a great place for you to audit, observe, choose, or pre-select. Find out what you like. When you go out into the real world, what you find is that men are then dispersed, and you don't get the same quality in concentration as you did in the university campuses. Now, for men, it's an amazing opportunity to meet your spouse. What you have is all the beautiful women, and if you were to go based on today's numbers, we know the enrollment for women far exceeds the enrollment for men. So you're spoiled with choice. In most universities, you're starting to see 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. This means as a man, you're spoiled with choice. You have the opportunity to select or pre-select who you want to be with. And number 5 is your tribe. You tend in higher education to finally meet people who you believe you want to be around. You form a tribe. You form a pack, a peer group. Part of the reason for this is number 6. Finally, you get to leave your dad or your mom's basement. You get away from your parents. You become a man, or you start your boyhood to manhood journey, or your girlhood to womanhood journey. But you leave the confines of the home. Number 7, you develop an identity that is slightly different to what you were given at home. So there is this transition in your identity where you start to form ideation, integration. Ideation, integration. I hope you can see that there are so many benefits. And number 8, you get the opportunity to increase the possibility and the potential, depending on how you perform, that you will earn more in perpetuity through a salary. There are benefits. Now, to consider the question about whether you should or should not, without thinking about all of the benefits and the reasons that come with education, is wrong. I hope you can see that. It's important for you to make a decision, not based on what people say, but based on all of the benefits, and then compare those benefits against the costs. And therefore, you'll be looking at what we call the net present value. There's been an assumption I made, and I have made so far. The assumption is actually that there is a physical place called the university, the college, buildings. But we know, following 2.5 years, 3 years of a pandemic, that there are different ways to study these days. So the other question that you should consider is, can you do the process of learning virtually? Or does it have to be in person, in a particular location? Making your decision should involve itemizing the benefits of each. For example, if you'd worked for a number of years like I did, you could have decided, I'd like to do an MBA. The MBA could be because I want to be in close proximity. Remember, value proposition, proximity, obscurity, competition, retention. I want to be a part of the alumni. And by leaving my home and my loved ones and traveling to perhaps another location, leaving England, London, England, and maybe going to New York to study, you find actually that you connect with people in person. Those relationships will help you in the future, or could help you in the future. On the other hand, it could be that you have found a great place and you are in a great place in your life in London, England. You do not need to travel. You have a family. You can therefore do an online equivalent of the same course. You don't have to be there in proximity, but you can gain the value. All you have to pay is the tuition fees and remain at home. Whereas if you traveled, you have to pay tuition fees, travel, expenses, accommodation, and all the other costs. It's all about deciding what is right for you, online, in person, or choosing the traditional approach. Obviously, as I hope you will understand, all schools are not created equal. The value of a certificate varies very much. If you get a certificate from Cambridge or Oxford or London School of Economics or from Harvard or Yale, MIT, these are prestigious Ivy League universities. They do carry weight, and your earning potential increases substantially just by having those certificates or being graduates from those universities. More importantly, your opportunity to find jobs increase exponentially if you come from one of the top Ivy League schools. As a matter of fact, before you graduate, you usually have a university opportunity where you meet employers. Employers actually come looking for you. You don't have to go out looking for them. They come to your university to recruit. This places you in a very advantageous position compared to the person who perhaps studied at an unknown university. That should be taken into account in your analysis, that you get first pick if you come from a great university. So all universities are not considered equal. The idea of should I go to university could be applied to lower level universities. When we talk about the Ivy League schools, the game changes. Now here's something interesting. In the lower leagues universities, there's something to be said about whether there's enough value for the price paid. I won't go into that, but I will admit that there is something to be said about whether there is enough value proposition. So I put it to you as follows. What is your end goal? I have found many people who go to university and do courses, men, and they choose the useless courses, arts and humanities. And they come out and they get jobs. Most people have jobs. Few people have careers, and even few people have callings. If you're going to university just because you want to get a job, I think perhaps something is amiss. The return on time invested is low. The return on capital invested is low. The return on energy is also low. If you are going to be going down the path of a blue-collar job, then perhaps apprenticeship is a better route for you. If you're going into a white-collar job, specifically STEM, then university could be a path for you and should be considered very carefully. If you're going into white collar, but it's effectively admin, where you don't generate any revenue, that could be the likes of those who work in human resources. It's questionable. You are simply an expense on the balance sheet of a business. You don't create any revenue. So any non-revenue creating position should be considered as perhaps not necessarily required for you to invest all that time. Part of the reason, there are people in great companies who work in HR and in other admin positions, executive assistants, general assistants, sales and marketing, who never went to university. And they are doing the same job you are doing. You have a 4-year degree and you have all the debt, and they make the same money as you do. So there's a question to be answered as to whether it's necessary. STEM, and then you have others. STEM, science, engineering, technology, math, and the rest. Of course, there are derivatives of that first group. Accounting, dentistry, medicals. There are derivatives. They fall within the whole STEM area anyway. I would also say, one of the reasons we recommend, and I actually think going to higher education for STEM is important, is it teaches you how to think. Critical thinking. You learn how to think inductively. You learn how to think deductively. You learn the scientific method. If you're lucky and you live somewhere in the Anglosphere, you learn other concepts. Western civilization, though you can learn it without going to university. The Judeo-Christian values, though you can learn it without going to university. But you generate, and you're around this aura of great insights, and you can learn so much. So there is a benefit. Now, I should say something as I bring today's session to a close. Cui bono? Who benefits? Who benefits from the whole education? The cost, the time, the investment? You have to ask yourself that question. Who benefits? Yourself? Is it zero sum? Is it a positive sum? You, the university, or someone in between, the employer? I'll let you decide that. But the key question to ask, to keep in mind is, are you funded or unfunded? If you've been given an opportunity for, and you've been handed a scholarship for which you pay nothing, and that scholarship includes sustenance and perhaps accommodation, and all that is required is 4 years, there's something to be said about whether the time you invest and the fact that you pay nothing should be carefully considered. On the other hand, if you're paying for everything yourself, I am very wary of accumulating so much debt before you even start to earn anything. For most people, especially, this is where I go back to women, think about this. 18 to 22, you start your career. Let's say you work from 23 up until 27, then you start a family. You have 3 kids. Let's assume you stair-step the kids, 135, and you wait until the last child, the third child is 3 years. It would mean you've been out of the game for 8 years, give or take 10 years. If you came back into the industry, for example, technology, the knowledge you have would be obsolete. So there is something to be questioned about whether that is the right approach. Alternatively, if you want to have kids, perhaps a strategy which might work better for you might simply be to have the children early and then go to school. Now, I'm not suggesting you get married early. There is a huge correlation, negative correlation between getting married early and having a successful relationship in marriage long term. Why? You're still not mature. In any case, there are considerations to be taken into account. Now, I'm going to end with 2 considerations that I haven't talked about. Cost. When people think about university not being worth it, what they take into account is the tuition fees. The total purchase cost includes the tuition fees, the additional fees you would have to incur, accommodation, and sometimes cost for sustenance. All of those costs should be considered. But here is the most important part of today's conversation. The costs and the value should be compared both intrinsically and non-intrinsically, qualitative and quantitative. I'm going to give you a formula to work out the quantitative. It's a concept called intrinsic valuation. All things remaining equal. If you were to go to university, and we use a good example, it will cost you £10 for your tuition and it'll take you 4 years. But at the point of graduation, you will earn £1 more than a person who did not go to university for the rest of your life. A simple way of finding out whether it's a good deal is to simply say, the cost, initial outlay for investing is 10. You can add to that all the other costs. You put that to the side. You then work out the fact that for the first 4 years, there will be no income and there will be no revenue generated by yourself. But you will have an income that exceeds the person who did not go to university. You discount each of those salaries back to today. So you work out the present value of your future income stream. You discount it at an interest rate that is correct, that is appropriate. You subtract all of the initial outlay or investments in terms of money from the present value of all this cash flow. That will give you what we call your NPV, net present value. If that number exceeds 1, then you should take the opportunity for university. The one thing I haven't included that I should have is when working out the total cost to you, it's not just the cost for tuition, it's also the lost income during that 4-year period, because the other person who is working is being paid. So you have to work out the opportunity cost and the cost, the purchase cost for the degree. If the NPV is greater than 1, you should take it. I won't go into the complicated explanation, but it simply means that if it is 1, you get £1 plus. You also get your cost of equity or your cost of funding, which was the discount rate you used. For example, if you use the discount rate of 8% or 10%, it means all things remaining equal, you get your 10% back. Even though you've done a present value, you make 10% plus an extra £1. You should take the opportunity. Let me explain it slightly differently. Amy and what's the name of the man that starts with E? Let's say Ernest. Are faced with a dilemma. 2 siblings. Amy says, I'm not going to university. Ernest says, I'm going to university. She starts to work. She makes £10 every single year. For the 4 years, whilst Ernest spends £40 for his tuition, plus loses £40. So he's £80 down. Emma has made £10 every year. So she's £40 up at the point when Ernest has graduated. From the point they graduate, let's say he makes £11 and she makes £10. What we simply do is we simply say, we add up all of his £11 for his entire working life. Call it 45 years. We discount all those £11 and we assume it stays constant, but we discount all the way back to today. We present value all that cash flow. We present value all of the cash flow M generates, £10 every year going forward. When we do that exercise, we'll find that both parties have a number. Whichever is greater should give you an indication that potentially going to university is a good idea or may not be a good idea. It's a simple way. The only problem with that is purely mathematical. It's about numbers. It doesn't take into account the value of your time, the opportunity cost or lost as a result of being in university, but more importantly, it does not take into account all of the benefits that I spoke about. Intangible, but very valuable. If you ask me a simple question, all things remaining equal, even if the cost of going to university was less than the cost of not going to university, Ernest has a negative value compared to Amy, I would still consider going to university or higher education for the benefits that I mentioned. Structure, discipline, networking, the potential to meet a spouse, getting away from family, getting away from my parents, finding my tribe, developing my identity, and the opportunity to make money. That's what life is all about. Choices. The choices come with costs. They will have constraints. There'll be consequences for the choices. And therefore, all I get are trade-offs. There are no solutions in life, especially within a finite environment. There are only trade-offs. Think carefully about whether the trade-off is worth the squeeze. I hope that's been useful.